Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I recently used to get to rank 2 with on the arena ladder. Now before I get into it, there's going to be an MTG zone link down in the description. If you click on that, you'll have the full deck list there that you can just import into arena if you want to try the deck out for yourself. And I'm also in the process of writing a full text article about this deck that will have more details, a full sideboard guide, how I changed the deck for best of one, and some tips and tricks to help you play the deck as well. So as soon as that's finished and up, I'll link that down in the description as well. But anyway, with that all out the way, this is my Esper Inquisitor Captain Greasefang deck in Historic. So the Greasefang side of this deck, if you're unaware, is basically a 2-card combo between Greasefang, Akiba Boss, and Parhelion. Pretty simple. The idea is we get Parhelion into the graveyard somehow, then we cast the Greasefang. Greasefang brings back the Parhelion to the graveyard with haste. Greasefang has 4 power, so it can immediately crew the Parhelion, and since Parhelion has haste, we can then immediately attack with it. It produces 2 4/4 Flying Angel tokens, so you're attacking for 13 damage out of nowhere, and creating 2 4/4 angels that stay on the battlefield as well. And we can do this as early as turn 3, so it's an incredibly powerful combo. Now Greasefang has been around in Historic for a while, but it hasn't really been popular recently, mainly because, you know, the 2 main weaknesses of the Greasefang combo is, first of all, graveyard hate shuts it off, because obviously you can't bring back the Parhelion from the graveyard if the opponent shuts off your graveyard, and secondly, the main other weakness of the Greasefang combo is instant speed interaction. And in Historic, graveyard hate is very popular right now because of decks like Is It Phoenix and Sideboard Arcanist decks, which incidentally happens to hit the Greasefang deck. You know, basically every single Historic deck is going to be packing graveyard hate in the sideboard, which also happens to hit the Greasefang deck. And additionally, there are also a lot of individual creatures that are very important to kill very quickly. For example, Core Spirit Dancer or Sram, from the Auras decks, Dreadhorde Arcanist from the Arcanist decks, Ravenous Squirrel from the food decks. So there's also a lot of instant speed interaction in the format as well, which makes it very hostile, and this is the main reason why Greasefang decks aren't really popular in Historic, because a lot of the sideboard and a lot of the general interaction that's being run also happens to hit the Greasefang decks. So I think the way to build Greasefang decks in Historic is to try and build a deck where the non-Greasefang part of the deck can win matches on its own. So I put a Greasefang deck out shortly after Greasefang came out, shortly after Kamigawa came out, and it was good for a little while, but the format, the metagame quickly adapted, started running more graveyard hate and more instant speed interaction. And the problem with that deck, and most other Greasefang decks I've seen in Historic, is the backup plan, the non-Greasefang part of the deck, isn't capable of winning matches on its own. So if the opponent has graveyard hate to shut off the Greasefang combo, or they have instant speed interaction to kill the Greasefang, your backup plan is just a subpar Historic deck at that point. You know, that Mardi deck that I put out, I did make a concerted effort to try and make it so the deck wasn't completely built around Greasefang, but the backup plan wasn't good enough on its own, if that makes sense. So I think the way to build Greasefang going forward in Historic is to try and put it into a deck where the non-Greasefang part of the deck is capable of winning matches on its own. You know, Greasefang is essentially the plan B in this deck, so I feel like I've finally got a shell where the non-Greasefang part of the deck is capable of winning matches on its own, but it can also enable the Greasefang combo, which is really powerful, because if the opponent doesn't have a way to shut off the Greasefang combo, we can just pop off out of nowhere, deal 13 damage and shut off the game. And even if they do have graveyard hate, for example, this deck is still capable of beating that, which is really important. So we'll start off by having a look at the ways that we enable the Greasefang combo in the deck, and then we'll also have a look at the way that it can win on its own, if that makes sense. So the best 2 Greasefang, or the best 2 Parhelion enablers in the deck are 4 copies of Diviner of Fates and 4 copies of Rafine. So Rafine, super powerful card, been an all-star in Explorer and Standard as well. So it's a 3-mana 1/4, flying with Ward 1, and whenever we attack, the target attacking creature connives X. So basically, for each creature we attack with, we get to draw that many cards, discard that many cards, and then for each non-land card that we discard, we get to put counters on the creature that's attacking. So this is obviously great at enabling us to ditch Parhelion into the graveyard, but it's also great because it's a very powerful aggro tool. We can start pumping our creatures if we get a wide board very quickly, and it also helps to smooth our draws. So the great thing about this deck is it's essentially a creature-based aggro deck, but because we're running so many connive cards with Diviner of Fates, Legistrator, and Rafine, we also have really good card selection, which allows us to grind into the late game. You know, we're very unlikely to draw dead in this deck because we have so many ways to draw and discard and filter through bad draws whilst also applying pressure. And then Diviner of Fates as well, new card from Alchemy. When it enters the battlefield, it connives, which is a really nice way to get Parhelion into the graveyard. And then once per turn, whenever we discard a card, we get to seek a card from our deck that has the same card type. So the really nice thing about Diviner of Fates is when it enters the battlefield, it's a way for us to pitch Parhelion or any other dead card into the graveyard. But then it also turns all of our other cards that discard into card advantage. So say we have Diviner of Fates on the battlefield and we cast a Raffine and then we attack. We draw and discard for the amount of creatures we're attacking with, and then we also get to seek with Diviner of Fates, similarly with Ledger Shredder and Seasoned Hallowblade, which are the other two ways we have of discarding cards. We get to turn all of these typically card neutral effects into card advantage, and we can also start discarding creatures, for example, to help us dig for Greasefang. So Diviner of Fates is really good because it's a way for us to enable Greasefang, but it's also a way for us to turn all of our other Greasefang enablers into additional card advantage. And then we've also got 4 copies of Ledger Shredder, so it's a 2-mana 1/3, and whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, it connives. So again, another way for us to pitch Parhelion into the graveyard. But even outside of that, it's just a generically good card. It's smoothing our draws, making our creatures bigger, and it having flying is huge as well, because a lot of the ways that we win against other creature decks is just by getting a really big Ledger Shredder or Raffine and start attacking through the air. So even if the opponent has blockers on the ground, we can force through a bunch of damage with both Shredder and Raffine. And then the final enabler for getting Parhelion into the graveyard is Seasoned Hallowblade. So this is a tech that I've copied from the Explorer Greasefang decks that I think is really great. So it's a 2-mana 3/1, which is very aggressive stats. It's very good against control and just other decks that are very slow to commit to the battlefield. And we can discard a card and tap it to give it indestructible into the end of turn. So this is really good as a way to protect it from removal. It's also a really good way for us to pitch Parhelion to the graveyard, and it also synergizes incredibly well with Diviner of Fates, because if we don't have any other way to discard, we can just use the Hallowblade both on our turn and on the opponent's turn to discard whatever's bad from our hand, and then we get to seek for another card off Diviner of Fates. So these two cards work really well together as a way to just get rid of the bad cards in our hand. Even just discarding lands to Seasoned Hallowblade during our opponent's turn is a great way to thin our deck of lands and hopefully make us more likely to hit good cards going forwards. So those are the main enablers that we've got of pitching Parhelion to the graveyard, and the thing that I really like about these cards is they're generically good cards on their own. I was really not a big fan of running cards like Goblin Engineer in the Mardu version of Greasefang, because that's a card that is very good if you can get Greasefang off, but if the opponent has a way to stop Greasefang with Graveyard Hate or Instant Speed Interaction, that is just a card that is really bad on its own, whereas these cards are all generically good on their own that happen to enable the Greasefang combo. So when we don't have Greasefang, they're just generically good cards that can win us the game. When we do have Greasefang, they're really nice ways to enable the combo as well. So the really nice thing about running a bunch of creatures that are generically good and happen to enable the Greasefang combo is that it also enables us to run Esper Sentinel, Thalia and Inquisitor Captain. So the deck is very aggressively slanted, but also has some really nice disruptive elements that give you a really big advantage against certain decks. So first of all, Esper Sentinel and Thalia, really nice combination to be running together, and they're very good against decks that rely on non-creature spells, which is really good right now because of decks like Auras, which revolves around casting a bunch of non-creature spells together. Thalia taxing all of the opponent's auras really slows that deck down. Similarly, Esper Sentinel taxing all of their auras really slows that deck down or provides us with card advantage. It also gives us a really good matchup against Phoenix as well, which is huge because that's one of the most popular decks in the format. Sentinel and Thalia are just really strong against Phoenix because it stops them chaining a bunch of spells together, or again off Sentinel gives us card advantage, and it also makes us really good against Control, which is huge because Auras, Control and Phoenix are 3 of the most popular decks in the format, and running an aggressively slanted shell with Esper Sentinel and Thalia gives you a real hedge against those matchups. Additionally, Food is a deck where this also does a decent amount of work because they do rely on a lot of non-creature spells like Meathook Massacre and Trail of Crumbs, and the other really nice thing that I like about this deck is that the other main deck that is running Esper Sentinel and Thalia is obviously Humans, and Humans is a deck that has a really bad matchup against Food. The main disadvantage to running Humans is you've got a pretty good matchup against a lot of decks, but the Food deck completely is just the worst matchup for you because of Cat Oven, because of Meathook Massacre. But the really nice thing about this deck is you have a way to go over the top of Food very quickly with Greasefang, and the fact that you can also run Esper Sentinel and Thalia against the Food deck means that you can slow them down, get off the combo, and it kind of shores up that weakness that the traditional Esper Sentinel Thalia aggro decks have, if that makes sense. So obviously Esper, Sentinel and Thalia is very good against the vast majority of the format that's relying on non-creature spells, but then we also get to run Inquisitor Captain because we're such a creature-heavy deck, and this is great because it enables us to dig for Greasefang once we've already pitched Parhelion, which is huge, allowing us to dig for the combo, but also it just allows us to commit to the board, allows us to dig for really powerful cards like Diviner of Fates and Rafine, so it's just really nice at enabling both the combo part of the deck and the aggro part of the deck, and just smooths out the deck really nicely. So that's sort of the main deck. Mana base wise, 24 lands has felt like a good amount. You know, when you're trying to hit your 4th land on time for Inquisitor Captain, there's an argument to potentially going up to 25 lands, but because we have so many ways to filter through the deck with Ledger Shredder, Diviner of Fates, and Rafine, I felt like 24 is a good amount. And you know, flooding out isn't that much of an issue because we have so many ways to filter through our draws. And yeah, the main deck in general just feels really nice because it feels like it's a 50-50 split between the aggro creature game plan and the Greasefang game plan, which I think is the way to go with Greasefang in Historic because, like I said, the big weakness of basically all of the Greasefang decks that I've seen in the past in Historic is Greasefang is very much the plan A, which makes it super vulnerable to Graveyard Hate and instant speed interaction, whereas this deck, you know, in essence, Greasefang is kind of the plan B of the deck, which is how you should build it, I think. Because it gives the opponent a really tough time dealing with it because they have to board in Graveyard Hate to deal with the Greasefang side of the deck, but you can just win through your Rafine, through your Diviner of Fates, through just attacking with Esper, Sentinel and Thalia. So it makes it very difficult for the opponent to attack both sides of the deck, and we don't just get completely shut down by Graveyard Hate, which is really nice. Then onto the sideboard, starting off with 3 copies of Remorseful Cleric. So this is the Graveyard Hate I'm choosing to run, and the main reason I've gone for Remorseful Cleric over any of the non-creature Graveyard Hate like Soul Guide Lantern or Unlicensed Hearse is mainly because of the Phoenix matchup. So against the Phoenix matchup, Thalia is one of the best cards in the matchup, and the problem with running stuff like Soul Guide Lantern or Unlicensed Hearse is that if you're running non-creature ways to tackle the graveyard, that also gets taxed by Thalia. And the other really nice thing about Remorseful Cleric is it is a creature, so we can hit it off Inquisitor Captain. So the main reason I've got Remorseful Cleric here is we can hit it off Inquisitor Captain, which is really nice in the matchups where it's important, but it's mainly here for against the Phoenix matchups, so our Graveyard Hate isn't getting taxed by the Thalia, if that makes sense. Then we've got 4 copies of Skyclave Apparition, and also 4 copies of Heartless Act. So Heartless Act is, I'm not 100% sure on this one, it's basically creature removal. So the thing is, against creature decks, obviously Esper, Sentinel and Thalia isn't great, so I wanted to have 8 pieces of removal to swap out for them. So we've got 4 copies of Skyclave Apparition and 4 copies of Heartless Act. In terms of Heartless Act, I think it's the best removal in general because I don't like Fatal Push in this deck because we don't really have any ways to trigger Revolt, and there are a lot of 3 and 4 mana creatures that are very important to be able to kill. And in terms of the other unconditional removal spells that you can run in black and white, you've obviously got Vanishing Verse, but there's a bunch of multicolored spells that are, or multicolored creatures, sorry, that are very important to be able to kill. So I don't think Vanishing Verse is that great. You've got Infernal Grasp, which is the best catch-all black removal spell, but we don't really have good ways to gain life, and there are a lot of decks that punish you for going to a low life total. We also do have a fair amount of Shocklands in the mana base, so I don't think, you know, running 4 copies of Infernal Grasp feels too risky when Cat Oven and Phoenix are very big parts of the metagame. Heartless Act does have some downsides that it can't kill creatures with counters on, which is, you know, the time that comes up most commonly is against Ledger Shredder, Sprite Dragon and Ravenous Squirrel, but we don't bring in Heartless Act against Phoenix or the food decks, so it's not really that bad there. There are obviously some other creatures in the format that will get counters on, but for the most part, this is the best catch-all answer. If there's another removal spell that you want to run in this place, then absolutely go for it. But I found Heartless Act to be the best sort of catch-all removal spell. So, like I said, against the creature decks, we cut Esper, Sentinel and Thalia, bring in Skyclave Apparition and Heartless Act, which does obviously increase the curve of the deck, but we're sort of shifting more towards a controlling role in those matchups anyway, so it's not really that big a deal. And we also get quality removal. The other great thing about Skyclave Apparition is obviously it can kill creatures, it can kill non-creatures, so it's very good against the food deck as well, taking up Witch's Elven Trade of Crumbs, for example. And another great thing is that we can also hit it off Inquisitor Captain, which is really nice as well. And then we've got Fragment Reality. So, like I said, I'm not bringing in Heartless Act against the food decks. Instead, my card of choice against the food decks is Fragment Reality. And like I said, I think this deck is better against the food decks than humans because we have access to a combo that we can use to go over the top of them very quickly. but I do feel like even though we do have a combo to go over the top of the food decks, they are a tough matchup, and so I wanted to dedicate 4 slots to that matchup. And the best option I could come up with is Fragment Reality. So I like this card against food because it deals with their most problematic cards in the start of the game. The main way that I've lost to this deck against food is when they have really fast starts. So if they go Cat, Oven, Squirrel, for example, or if they go Soul Guide Lantern to shut off the Greasefang part of the deck, Fragment Reality is great because it kills most of their early problematic cards. It can take out Ravenous Squirrel very favourably, it can take out Witch's Oven very favourably, and even though Trail of Crumbs is one of their best cards, it's kind of subpar if they don't have Witch's Oven or Gilded Goose, both of which Fragment Reality can take out very easily. So I like Fragment Reality as a way to just take out all of their 1-mana cards very efficiently, just to slow them down, give us time to attack in, and then potentially get the Greasefang combo off as well. Again, if you can think of another option for you that you think is better against food, then go for it. But from my experience, Fragment Reality has just been the best option there. And then, like I said as well, you know, Heartless Act is a card you might typically think you'd want to bring in against the Phoenix decks, but we don't really have that many cards that we can actually cut against Phoenix, and we want to be bringing in Remorseful Cleric because we want to have access to Graveyard Hate, obviously. And because we have Esper Sentinel and Thalia in the deck, which are normally going to be our cuts against creature decks, obviously they're the best cards against Phoenix, so the reason that we're not bringing in any Heartless Act is because we're only bringing in Remorseful Cleric and potentially Skyclave Apparition in that matchup. There's not really much you can cut out of the main deck, and that's the main reason why we've got quite narrow cards. You know, the reason I can afford to dedicate 4 slots in the sideboard for the food matchup is because the main deck is very efficient, very streamlined at what it's doing, and so you can't really afford to cut too much or the deck stops operating well. You know, like I said, if you're up against a deck that Esper Sentinel and Thalia are very effective, you can't really afford to cut them, and if you start cutting your enablers for the Greasefang combo, you're going to be left in situations where you just have Parhelion in your hand and no way to get it into the graveyard, if that makes sense. But anyway, that is the deck. It has felt really powerful to me. Like I said, main weakness of Greasefang decks in Historic for a while now have been that they're just too reliant on the combo, and so I feel like I've finally come up with a good deck where the non-Greasefang part of the deck is very capable of winning games on its own, and in essence the Greasefang combo is the plan B of the deck, which is very hard for opponents to tackle because both sides of the deck are very capable of winning the game on its own. But anyway, that's the deck. If you've got any questions, drop me a comment down below. Next up, I've got 5 matches that I played on the ladder so you guys can see the deck in action, so I hope you enjoy the gameplay. Big up. Okay, sweet, here we go. Okay, so we're going first here, which is nice. Obviously can't keep a no-lander. This looks pretty reasonable though. There's kind of a debate here between discarding Rafine and discarding a 3rd land. I think we want to keep Parhelion to pitch to our Connive, but yeah, I think since we've got the 2nd Rafine, we can afford to put one back. That does make our hand a little bit vulnerable to Thoughtseize, because if they Thoughtseize away the Rafine, we're kind of left with not that much, but okay, drawing Thalia here is pretty nice. I was going to just play Shredder out on 2, but if you can play Thalia on 2, especially against the deck, we're against a red-black deck, so my first guess is probably like an Arcanist or red-black mid-range deck, which Thalia is pretty good against, because it taxes all of their removal and their non-creature spells like Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Chandra. Okay, so we are against an Arcanist deck, but that's not bad here, because we can play Rafine out, and we can attack with the Thalia, turn it into a 3-2 so that they can't just block with the Arcanist. And we get Parhelion into the graveyard, so if we ever draw Greasefang, we're in pretty good shape here. Now, it is a little bit scary them having Arcanist, because they could... Okay, I was going to say, if they had Fatal Push or Bloodchief's Thirst, that could be a way they could attack on a later turn and kill the Rafine. So I think I'm going to lead on an attack with the Rafine here, just to see what we draw. Interesting. So I think I'm kind of incentivized to pitch one of the Thalias here, just to take Rafine off being able to be killed by Molten Impacts. Although, actually that was probably bad, because we want to. I think it's more important to make Ledger Shredder a 2/4 here, so it can't be killed by Strangle. Which so yeah. So I think what I should have done there is just attack with Rafine, discard a land, then play Shredder, Thalia, and discard the 2nd Thalia to Shredder to make it a 2/4. Because I think turning Shredder into a 2/4 when we know the opponent has Strangle is more important than making Rafine into a 2/5 just of the fear of like a Molten Impact when we don't even know if they're playing Molten Impact. So that was probably bad. If we'd played that differently, we could have had a Ledger Shredder in hand instead of a Hallowed Fountain. So We do get another connive. Okay, so it ended up working out fine in the end, but if I could go back, I definitely would have discarded a land to the Rafine connive and then gone Shredder into Thalia, discard the other Thalia. So anyway, we'll lead on an attack here. I think I'm going to connive on the Shredder, just because that's the card I don't mind them killing as much. We get to pitch another Parhelion, which is great, and I'd rather pitch a land here because we get another connive off the Diviner of Fates here, which is really nice. And even though we draw a land, I think I'm going to pitch the Shredder because it makes the Diviner of Fates out of range of Strangle, and also searches for another creature. Now we've drawn Greasefang as well, so we've got a pretty big board already, and we have Greasefang ready to bring back Parhelion next turn, so they kind of need, if they don't hold up instant speed interaction, we win here pretty much because they're already below 13, so Greasefang bringing back Parhelion swings for 13, and I'm hoping that they're pretty incentivized to tap out to try and deal with our board here. Okay, so they pay 3 for a Pyromancer. I think that's a good start for us. I mean, to be honest, if they do hold up mana, okay, I was going to say, if they, you know, say they just passed holding up Fatal Push and black mana, I would have probably just attacked with Rafine and held on to Greasefang, because that's a pretty, you know, it's a pretty big signal that they're going to crack the Fatal Passage and Fatal Push, but since our board is already pretty big and we have a lot of power in the air, they're kind of incentivized to just push here anyway. Wow, and they pay for the Sentinel tax, so they're completely tapped out. We're just going to win with the Greasefang here, which is pretty huge. They do get to Fatal Push the Diviner of Fates because they cracked their Fable Passage, but we're just good to win here. They can't Fatal Push the Rafine because they can't pay for the Ward tax, so even though that was a pretty good turn for them, we have the Greasefang here to just win us. So, yeah, that was pretty sweet. So we'll just crew up the Parhelion here, and we also will get a bunch of connives off the Rafine because we can target Rafine with its connive trigger. We get to put the 4/4s in play first, which means we get to draw 4 and discard 4, so we can turn Rafine into, what would that be, like, yeah, 6/9, swinging for a huge amount of damage and close the game out here. So sweet, that was pretty good, that felt good. Like, obviously we did make a mistake early on, but because of all the conniving we did, we managed to get out of it fairly handily, which is nice. So here, it's hard to know how to sideboard here, because certain red-black decks are more reliant on the graveyard than others. Obviously the opponent has Arcanist here, but so I think I'm going to bring in some amount of removal, and probably cut Thalia. No, Thalia was alright there, but they do have a lot of creatures. So, you know, Thalia isn't amazing. I just want to make sure I have enough creatures in the deck that we still can trigger Inquisitor Captain consistently. I'm just debating whether I want to bring in Apparition as well. I mean, the downside of bringing in Apparition here is that it does make the curve slightly higher. If I can avoid it, I don't want to be cutting 2 drops and replacing them with 3 drops when we already have 12 3 drops. So I'm just going to trim up a single Heartless Act and put 1 Skyclave Apparition in just to be able to deal with some non-creature permanents, maybe like a Chandra or something like that. And we have so many ways to filter through the deck, as well as Inquisitor Captain, that just running a single copy, you know, we're not unlikely to be able to dig for it if we really need to. And the other nice thing about bringing in a single Apparition is it just means that the opponent can't just exile a graveyard to turn off Inquisitor Captain, because that is one of the things you need to be mindful of when you're boarding Heartless Act in. You want to make sure that if you're playing against a deck that's likely to exile your graveyard, you don't want Inquisitor Captain to turn off later in the game, because you still need to have 20 creatures between your hand, library, and graveyard. So opponent does have the Hearse, but it doesn't really matter because we have, you know, the deck is pretty insulated against graveyard hate. They do have Rahilda, so we could potentially just play the Rafine out here and attack, but I think killing the Rahilda is more important, because if we play the... Well, we would actually, no, we wouldn't want to attack with the Hallow Blade if we played Rafine anyway, because the opponent could have a removal spell for Rafine and then attack with Rahilda. And I'd rather get on the aggressive here. I'd rather just kill the Rahilda, because if we don't kill the Rahilda, we're going to have to constantly keep creatures black to stop them getting advantage off it. So I quite like just killing the Rahilda, getting it out of the way, and starting to get aggressive with the Hallow Blade. And we can always just play the Rafine next turn. Okay, interesting. So they don't do anything here. So I'm just going to slam the Rafine here, and then attack with the Hallow Blade, start getting value off the Rafine, and start making the Hallow Blade a bit bigger. Okay, so they have Fry for the Rafine. Oh wow, they pay for the ward. So the opponent shouldn't have paid for the ward there, because the way ward works is it counters the spell if the opponent they can't pay the ward tax. But since Fry can't be countered, they could have just paid 2 for Fry and not paid the ward tax, and it still would have killed the Rafine there. So I don't know if that's relevant. I don't know if they had another 2 mana play they wanted to make, but if you're playing Fry against Rafine specifically, or against any card that has ward on it, it will kind of bypass the ward, because ward counters the spell if you don't pay for it, if that makes sense. But anyway, they kill the Rafine, which is fine. We have the second one in hand, and we still have Hallowblade and Greasefang, so still think we're in a good spot here. The opponent's already down to 2 cards, and this is the thing. The opponent's obviously brought in Hearse here to shut off the Greasefang, which makes complete sense, but okay, they have another Fry. But yeah, as you can see, our deck is very capable of just playing a decent aggro game plan, so even though Hearse is decent against shutting the Greasefang side of the deck off, we can just beat down with our other creatures. So we'll get Hallowblade down. Obviously, it's a bit annoying we do have Greasefang and Parhelion, and the opponent has Graveyard Hate, but it's not too bad. Okay, so they do have Fatal Push. We'll just protect the Hallowblade here for sure, so we'll pitch the Parhelion. So even though, you know, in an ideal world, we'd be able to pitch the Parhelion and get it back with the Greasefang, not a huge deal here because we have 2 3/1s in play. Now, I am a little bit concerned next turn because they could just pass with Hearse and Den of the Bugbear up, and then they could animate the Den and crew the Hearse with the Unlight. Crew the Hearse with the Bugbear. They top deck Chandra, which is a little bit annoying. So even though Greasefang, even though we're not going to get the Parhelion back as things stand, I think, you know, Greasefang is a 4/3, is a decent attacker, but I think it's worth discarding to the Hallowblade here because we want to just keep applying pressure here. You know, Hallowblade discarding the Greasefang there, Hallowblade is essentially like a 3-power creature with haste because it's already in play, so I don't think it makes sense letting the Hallowblade die there. We want to keep applying pressure and just close this game out. Now again, even if the opponent doesn't draw anything great, they still have the option, like I said last turn, of animating the Den, crewing it with the Hearse, and then it's a 7-power creature we can't really attack through, so that is a bit problematic. Oh wow, okay. So we drew the Apparition, which is sick, because now they can't do that play. They can't crew the Den with the Hearse, so we can actually attack now. Now they could obviously have a removal spell, they could have a Fatal Push for the Apparition, but the token that they get off it is only going to be a 2/2, so if they kill the Apparition and block, we can still protect the Hallowblade. Okay, they don't have a removal spell by the looks of things. They're going to animate the Den, so we're very happy just pitching Parhelion here to keep the Hallowblade alive. Now they go down to 5, and they've lost their their creature land, and they only have 4 lands in play now as well, so okay, so they've got Rahilda. Okay, and Fatal Push. So they did manage to kill one of the Hallowblades, but that's not a huge deal. Okay, so Diviner of Fates is really nice here because we can play that as a creature, connive, and we get to keep, you know, we'll have a card in hand to protect the Hallowblade with as well. So we'll attack with the Hallowblade. Obviously we can't attack with the Apparition here because Rahilda has first strike. Okay, they let it through. They go down to 2, which is, you know, they need something really good here to survive. Like, I don't know if they're main decking Meathook Massacre. Okay, yeah, we got there. Sweet. Okay, so we're going second here. At least I assume we are. Yeah, it's weird. I can't think of any decks in Historic or Explorer where you'd want to put your opponent on the play. I've heard about some decks in the past, maybe in like super grindy control mirrors, but basically my whole time playing Arena, that's never been a good idea. Okay. So I think we can keep this. We don't have any black mana yet, but we don't have any black cards in our hand, so I think that's fine. But yeah, we do have a lot of good early plays here. You know, Thalia's great to get out onto. Blue-white Consider. Ledger Shredder. Interesting. Not sure what we're up against here. I mean, if they're a Consider deck... okay, they're Esper, so I imagine they're also on Greasefang, probably, then? So I think I'm probably going to just play Thalia out here because if the opponent is a deck that's playing non-creatures, getting Thalia out on 2 is always a great idea because just being able to, you know, even in the mirror match against other Greasefang decks, being able to tax their removal, their ways to get Parhelion into the graveyard like Tainted Indulgence or Faithful Mending is really big as well. Yeah, especially with Ledger Shredder in play, getting Thalia in play is great because, as you could see there, they had to spend 2 mana on a Fatal Push, which potentially stops them playing 2 spells in a turn to get value off the Shredder. So again, I think it's early enough in the game that we can still get value off Thalia here, so I'm just going to play another one. And again, it should prevent them, unless they have 2 1-mana spells, it should prevent them from getting 2 spells for their Shredder here, which is nice. Okay, so they don't have the they don't have the Parhelion, which is good. Or yeah, I'm pretty sure if the opponent had Parhelion there, they would just pitch it. We're going to play Shredder here because we have missed land drops, which is a bit annoying. We haven't hit our black source for Rafine yet, so if the opponent is able to chain together 2 spells, we want to make sure that we're getting value off our Shredder as well, and it kind of stops the opponent from attacking in the air as well, which is nice. Okay, sick. So we drew the black source. So we've got a few options here. We could play Captain, we could play Shredder and Hallowed Blade, or we could just play Rafine here. I think I'm interested in just going for Rafine because we can start attacking and getting a bunch of value off the Rafine, start sculpting our hand a little bit more. Okay, nice. So I don't think we want the second Hallowed Blade. We do want to keep hitting land drops, especially with Captain as well. And as things stand with Thalia in play, that should slow them down a lot more than us because we have basically, well, we don't have any non-creatures in the deck other than Parhelion. Okay, so they've got their own Rafine. So to be honest, I'm kind of glad I got mine in play first because I feel like whoever starts getting value off Rafine first is just going to tend to run away with the game. Okay, so they've got a 4/3 Informant. We're definitely going to let this through. Wow, okay, so they Fatal Pushed the Thalia. Interesting. I guess they must have just drawn that off the Rafine trigger for them to do it at that point. We do get the value off the Shredder, which is nice. And again, you know, on this board state, Hallowed Blade is really not going to be doing much in the face of a 1/4, so that's an easy pitch there. Okay, interesting. So I think I'm interested in getting another Shredder in play here, just to get value, because we're going to start getting a ton of connive triggers, and I also really want to get Esper Sentinel into play here. Okay, so now we've drawn an untapped land, we can pitch the Courtyard, although we're going to be playing a land this turn anyway, so I think it's probably best to keep the Courtyard because it produces an extra colour of mana basically. And we can afford to attack with both creatures here because, you know, even if they double block Rafine, they're not going to be able to kill it. And I think I'm interested in making the Shredder bigger here. Wow, okay, so we hit the Greasefang, that's sick. So we'll just pitch a land in the Inquisitor Captain here, turn the Shredder into a 4/6. And the other really nice thing about getting Shredder into play is that it makes it very difficult for the opponent to attack for free damage. You know, we can afford to attack with a Shredder and keep one back on defense now, which is nice. Okay, so they give us a card off the Faithful Mending. That's either a really good sign or a pretty bad sign. I mean, they still haven't found the Parhelion, which is pretty huge for us. And we get 2 extra connives here. Wow, there's another Parhelion for us, and we have the Greasefang here, so... Actually, I think pitching a land is fine here. I was going to say, like, keeping a land in order to cast 2 Greasefangs the same turn if the opponent has removal is good, but the opponent's tapping out here, so we should be pretty clear to Greasefang. You know, the only 1-mana removal spell they have that can kill Greasefang is Fatal Push, and they don't have any way to trigger Revolt during our turn, so I'm pretty confident we're going to get the win here because we're going to get our Parhelion off before the opponent's. The only slight downside is if the opponent can get their Parhelion back next turn, we don't have a way to get it into the graveyard immediately. You know, obviously we have Rafine, but we have to attack with it, so we don't currently have another way, but we do have Captain we could play to hit a Diviner of Fates or something like that. Yeah, okay, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure we win that one. So here we definitely want Graveyard Hate, so we'll bring in the Remorseful Cleric, and Hallowed Blade isn't great because they have a lot of creatures with big toughness, and, you know, it's very difficult for it to attack past Rafine. I was considering cutting the 4th Hallowed Blade for a Skyclave Apparition there, but we're already trimming our enablers for Parhelion. And Hallowed Blade, you know, even though it's not ideal in a lot of matchups, it is very important as a consistent way to get Parhelion into the graveyard because, you know, stuff like Ledger Shredder and Diviner of Fates are decent if you have Parhelion immediately, but you're not always going to have a way to trigger the 2 spells for Connive on Ledger Shredder, and obviously Diviner of Fates is only once on the Enter the Battlefield trigger, so it is possible if you're just relying on those 2 cards to be stuck with Parhelion in hand You know, especially if you've used Diviner of Fates, for example, and you don't have another way to pitch it. Whereas Hallowblade is just consistent. You can always pitch Parhelion to the graveyard whenever you have that. So I like keeping it in matchups, you know, as a one-of if you've only got 3 cards to bring in. And obviously in this matchup, we're both trying to Parhelion, so having the consistency of pitching it to the graveyard is pretty huge. So yeah, this hand looks pretty good. Obviously we don't have blue mana for the Rafine yet, but we've got a pretty nice curve out of Sentinel into Remorseful Cleric. We've potentially got Greasefang on 3 if we don't draw a blue land. Okay, Shredder, I mean, that's a good card to have, but we would have preferred seeing a land there, I think. Okay, so they Fatal Push immediately, which, you know, I'm happy to trade Esper Sentinel for another card there. Okay, they go for Shredder. So unfortunately we don't draw the blue land for our Shredder, but it does mean we can get Cleric into play here, which is pretty nice. And we do also have the Parhelion now, so as long as we can draw a blue source reasonably soon, I think we've got a decent chance. Okay, so the opponent plays Tainted Indulgence, see if we got... Okay, it doesn't look like they've got the Parhelion there. I mean, since we have Remorseful Cleric... Oh wow, okay, we drew the blue source on time. I was going to say, since we have the Remorseful Cleric, they might be incentivized to hold on to Parhelion until they've killed the Cleric, but yeah, I'm not really sure. Maybe they're better off discarding the Parhelion and forcing us to crack the Cleric, but either way, hitting a blue source there was pretty clutch, because now we can go Rafine and then attack and get Parhelion into the graveyard, and then if the opponent taps out here, we can just go for Greasefang next turn. Wow, it looks like they do. So they've got white mana. Okay, they do have Parhelion of their own, but they've only got white mana, so the only card they could realistically have here that can stop Greasefang is Fragment Reality, which I very much doubt they're running, and even if they do, we get a free 2 or 1 drop out of it. Okay, sweet. So we get to attack with Parhelion here, which is pretty huge. We can then connive, draw 4 cards, discard 4 cards to force a bunch of damage through here. So we don't want the second Shredder. I don't think we really need Shredder on this board state, to be honest. I can probably pitch a land. I think I want to keep 1 land at least, so that we can play multiple spells next turn. Thalia is probably a little bit too late to have, and we've already got a Remorseful Cleric, so I think I'm happy to pitch this one. Maybe it was a bit greedy. Maybe we should have pitched a land instead of a Remorseful Cleric there, but I'm pretty confident we're winning this. Even if they have Greasefang, we have Remorseful Cleric to exile their graveyard, so... Okay, so we put them down to 2. And we get to play Esper Sentinel here, so yeah, I'm pretty confident we're going to win this one. See what the opponent's got. Okay, so they do have Greasefang, but we have the Remorseful Cleric to shut off their graveyard, so shouldn't really matter. Okay, so we'll exile their graveyard here, stop them getting Oh no, wait, hold on, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so I should have passed to combat first, waited for them to select the Greasefang out the graveyard, and then exiled their graveyard, because they could potentially now have Indulgence or Faithful Mending into pitching another Parhelion. Okay, thankfully they didn't, but yeah, I should have waited there, but still ended up winning, so thankfully we weren't punished. Okay, so we're going second here, and I mean, I think this hand is decent enough. We obviously don't have a black source or a third land yet, but we got pretty good odds of drawing it, especially because we're going second, and Sentinel on 1, Sentinel on 2. If the opponent's playing a deck with a lot of non-creature spells, there's a chance that we might end up drawing off the Sentinels anyway, which will definitely help that. And if we do draw a black source, you know, wow, another Sentinel as well, and it looks like the opponent might be on control, maybe. They could be on affinity as well. So could still be affinity, I'm not 100% sure yet, but if the opponent is on control, having a triple Esper Sentinel start has to be good. Okay, so unfortunately we don't draw a third land, but drawing Parhelion here is not too bad, because if we do draw a black source for Rafine, we can immediately pitch Parhelion into the graveyard, which is pretty huge. Okay, so the opponent passes, so I have to imagine they're probably on control. You know, there's still a chance they might be on affinity, but Hall of Storm Giants isn't that commonly run in blue-white affinity anyway, so yeah, pretty rough that we didn't draw a third land there.
Okay, I mean, Fateful Absence, I'm kind of happy to see that because we do get to draw a card off the Sentinel, and we also get to draw a card off the Treasure here as well. So we did draw our third land, but unfortunately it's not a black source, so if we don't draw a castable card next turn, we might just have to play a land and pass again, which is a little bit rough. But again, you know, I still think their hand was a good keep, because in a 24 land deck, the chances of drawing our third land on time are pretty high, especially having 3 Esper Sentinels. And we're also running enough black sources that we're getting a little bit unlucky here. Drawing a black source here is going to be really important, I think, if we can. Wow, the opponent taps out. Okay. So it's especially important now because this might be, you know... Wow, okay, we drew on. Sick. So I was going to say, if they just passed there and we did draw a black source, playing Rafine into a counterspell could be pretty bad, but they also have been missing land drops. They're only stuck on 3 lands, so... Even if they had a counterspell for a Fiend there, we would have drawn a card off the Sentinel, which is pretty important. Okay, so Diviner of Fates is pretty nice. There is an argument to playing that out pre-combat, but I think it's probably better to attack with the Rafine first, just to see if they do have anything they want to play in response to the attack. And we also get to draw an extra card in case we want to play something else. Okay, so we get to pitch the Parhelion here, which is really nice, especially with 2 Greasefangs in hand. And then I'm going to play Diviner of Fates instead of Inquisitor Captain, because I don't want to play Captain into a Censor or Jari Disruption, especially if the opponent, you know, we're pretty behind on tempo compared to normal because we missed lands for a couple of turns. So, wow, Diviner of Fates resolves, which is pretty huge. I'm going to pitch the Ledger Shredder here because it's probably the slowest threat. You know, Hallowed Blade is great at applying pressure. We want to keep the captains as a way to refuel if they sweep the board. And we obviously want to keep both Greasefangs with Parhelion in the graveyard. So, even though we did stumble on mana early, the opponent's also stuck on 3 lands, and we're in a pretty sick position now, I think. Okay, wow, the opponent chose not to counter the Diviner of Fates. I guess like I said, they're also missing land drops, so they probably want to dig for their 4th land. Okay, no second white, so that could mean they don't have a sweeper. So there is, you know, it might seem kind of greedy to just slam Greasefang here, but we have a second one. If they have a counter spell or removal spell, we still get to... Oh wow, they didn't have anything. I was going to say, even if they have a way to kill the Greasefang there, we still get to attack with 2 creatures, get 2 Rafine Connive triggers, get to seek an extra card off the Diviner of Fates, and potentially put 2 counters on our creatures as well. So even if the opponent had a way to kill Greasefang, which I kind of expected them to do, you know, just having 4 open mana, I expected them to have at least a removal spell or a counter spell, but even if they hadn't, I think we're in a great spot there. Quickly skipped over sideboarding, but the main deck is so well set up against control that we don't really need anything, you know. We want to keep all the enablers for the combo, because they're just generically good cards in the matchup. Anyway, Hallowed Blade is great here, because it can dodge destruction removal, and it's very good at applying pressure. Esper Sentinel and Thalia are obviously like at their best in the control matchup, so our main deck is very well set up against control anyway, which is great. It means we just don't have to sideboard at all, which is also nice because it means we don't have to dedicate any sideboard slots to the control matchup. That's one of the main reasons why I'm able to run like 4 Fragment Reality specifically for the food decks. I'm able to run 8 slots in the sideboard just for the creature decks as well, so yeah, control is typically a very good matchup for this deck because we're an Esper Sentinel Thalia aggro deck, which is typically the worst matchup for control, but we also happen to have a combo. We also happen to have a bunch of connive cards that ensure that we don't run out of gas as well. The only card that we're really worried about is Narset, because connive isn't optional, so if we do connive during our turn, we're just discarding cards, but since we have Esper Sentinel and Thalia, and we're a very aggressive deck, we can pretty easily attack down the Narset before that's an issue. So control should be a pretty good matchup overall. Let's just hope we don't have mana issues like we did last game. Okay, so obviously we don't have blue mana here, but I think I'm pretty happy to keep this, because we're going second again, we're more likely to draw a blue source on time, and we also have Hallowed Blade to play on too, which is pretty good in the matchup overall. So let's see what the opponent has here. Okay, so they play a tap land. So I'm going to play the Hallowed Blade here. Had they played that Hallowed Fountain untapped, I think I probably would have gone for Esper Sentinel instead, because I don't want to play into a Censor or Jari Disruption if we don't have to. And getting Sentinel into play early is also reasonably good. Okay, so they have a portable hole for the Hallowed Blade, which is a little bit annoying. Thankfully we have the second one in hand though. Wow, okay, we missed lands again. That's a bit rough. But I mean, Since they played a tap land again, I'm pretty confident playing Hallowblade out. Had they played an untapped land again, I think there's an argument for playing Sentinel there, but I might have gone for Hallowblade anyway, because I think it's important as the opponent's getting up on mana to start applying pressure. Wow, we missed on lands again. We're getting pretty unlucky this game. I mean, I'm going to attack even if the opponent has Wandering Emperor. I think we can't just not attack here. We need to start applying pressure. And even though we didn't draw a land, drawing a Parhelion isn't bad here because we do have the Greasefang in hand. So the opponent's obviously thinking here. I mean, we do kind of get blown out by the Wandering Emperor, especially because we don't have a follow-up play other than Esper Sentinel here. But like I said, I think... okay, they do have Shark Typhoon, that's fine though. Because we can just discard the Parhelion in response to them blocking if they do block. Yeah, okay, sweet. So, yeah. We do kind of get blown up by the Wandering Emperor, but since we miss lands, I think it's just... you know, we're kind of not beating the Wandering Emperor anyway, so I don't think it's worth playing around at this point. And plus, we need to just start applying pressure, like I said. We are definitely forced into the aggressive role in this matchup, so we can't just sit back and play around everything. And getting Esper Sentinel in play is obviously really nice here because it will hopefully help us to hit our third land. And now we also have Parhelion into the graveyard, so we don't even need it to be a blue source. Any untapped land will allow us to cast the Greasefang, which will hopefully allow us to get the Parhelion back. So opponent's in the tank here. But I mean, kind of makes sense because Hallowblade and Sentinel are both difficult cards to deal with for sure. From the control side anyway. So I'm just trying to think what I'm worried about. Honestly, like, the one thing I'm worried about is them just passing and not triggering the Sentinel or playing around Sentinel. Wow, they just tap out for Teferi, and there's our third land. Okay, sick. I was going to say, the one thing I'm most worried about in that spot is just not drawing our third land with a bunch of 3-drops in hand, but this might play perfectly into our hand now because we can just cast Greasefang, and they need to have exactly Sense Sadrari Disruption or Fateful Absence. Even though Greasefang does kind of get shut down by those things, I'm happy to play it out here because if they do play one of those, then it will trigger the Sentinel, which will draw us another card, and we can still put the Teferi down to 1 loyalty, which is pretty huge. Wow, they don't have anything. I mean, maybe they have, like, artifact removal? Wow, okay, nice, we got there. So even though we stumbled on mana, we managed to win that one both games. That's pretty sick. Okay, so we're going second here. Double Greasefang. I don't think we can keep this. You know, I think it's reasonable to keep hands with just 3 drops if you have Rafine or Diviner, but just with Greasefang. This is a little bit of a loose keep, but you know, I'm kind of riding on Rafine being good here, and I think this is... oh wow, another land. I was going to say, I think this is probably better than a random 5, especially if we're against a deck where Sentinel's good. But yeah, we are very vulnerable to Thoughtseize with this hand, and it is a bit of a risky hand. Maybe we should have gone to 5, but I think... oh wow, we're against Goblins, okay. I was going to say, I think against Thoughtseize decks specifically, you're much worse going to 5 cards anyway. Because obviously, the lower your starting hand is, the more you get hit by Thoughtseize anyway. So I think, you know, obviously it sucks that the 2 cards we've drawn so far have also been lands, but yeah, if we're taking Thoughtseize into consideration, then I think it's better to keep this hand than go down to a 5. Grumgully, okay, so the opponent might be playing my Cabaretti Revels combo deck. We'll have to see. So we do get to play Rafine here, and the other great thing is if Rafine survives, we can start looting away these lands anyway, so kind of kept this this hand on the back of Rafine. Okay, so they do have the green source. See if they play out. Okay, they've got Sling-Gang Lieutenant. So we've just got to hope they don't have Grumgully into Putrid Goblin here. We obviously know they got the Grumgully, so if they have land Putrid Goblin, we lose next turn. It would be a bit unfortunate. Okay, Inquisitor Captain's not a bad draw here. So I think I'm going to go for the Captain first, just to make a more informed decision off the Rafine, because say we hit a Greasefang, then, you know, digging for and pitching Parhelion is what we should be looking for. If we go for Diviner of Fates, that might help sculpt our hand a little bit more, so I think it's best to go for Captain first just to get a bit more information. If we were running something like a Skyclave Apparition, where we could take out the Sling-Gang Lieutenant in our main deck, then it's probably better to attack with the Rafine first here, but since we're not running any removal like that in the main, I think it makes more sense to just play Captain first to get a bit of extra information. Wow, we're really flooding out this game. But I mean, we're not in a bad spot. As long as the opponent doesn't have Grumgully into Putrid Goblin, we should be alright. I mean, having said that, they do have a lot of other good draws. You know, Cabaret Revels would be rough, but they need an actual green source. Oh, wow, okay. They actually did have it. So the way the combo works there, you can watch my other video on it, but they'll just repeatedly sack Putrid Goblin to the Sling-Gang Lieutenant and win there. So this is a matchup where Thalia and Esper Sentinel are really bad. You know, the only if they are playing my list, the only non-creature card they're going to be running is Cabaret Revels. So we'll just switch Esper Sentinel and Thalia out for Heartless Act and Skyclave Apparition, and then we're slowing the curve of the deck down a little bit, but we're morphing into more of a control deck anyway, going into games 2 and 3. And the Revels deck is pretty vulnerable to a lot of removals, so okay, on the play I think we can keep this. You know, keeping a hand with nothing before turn 3 is a bit risky in certain matchups, but the opponent's running a deck, if they are running my list, that, you know, they're much more of a combo deck where they need to set stuff up first. So I think this hand's a reasonable keep, especially because of Apparition. If they do have a fast start, we have a way to slow them down a little bit at least. And we have Inquisitor Captain to try and help dig for another Apparition as well, if we need it. And obviously then Diviner of Fates is good at just sculpting our hand, make sure that we keep hitting good stuff as well. Okay, Putrid Goblin on 2, that's not too much of an issue. Well, we're flooding out kind of a lot again, but yeah, Putrid Goblin on its own isn't a huge problem. Okay, nice, we hit Parhelion, so if we ever draw a Greasefang, we can kind of pop off here. See what the opponent has here. Okay, they've got Revels, so thankfully we have the Apparition to be able to deal with that. We could also... Oh wow, we hit Greasefang. I was going to say we could also Inquisitor Captain to try and hit Greasefang. So the issue here, the only reason why I'm tempted to go for Apparition instead of Greasefang here, is they could go land Sling-Gang Lieutenant and hit a Grumgully, which would allow them to win immediately, but I think it just makes a lot more sense to just go for the Greasefang here. And the opponent will need to have exactly land Sling-Gang Lieutenant and hit exactly Grumgully off the Cabaret Revels. So we'd have to get pretty unlucky to lose here. And if the opponent doesn't have that, I'm pretty sure we just win next turn anyway, because we have these 2 4/4 Flying Angels. So just got to pray they don't have Sling-Gang Lieutenant and hit the Grumgully. I guess they could also have Skirk Prospector in Grumgully, and then they have infinite mana at that point. Okay, so they play Matron and hit Munitions Expert. Okay, we should be good to win here then. I can't think of any sequence they could have to get them out of this. They could have land Prospector, but even then, you know, they could only really search for Muck. Like, the only card that can really win them the game this turn is Muxus. And even if they have a Prospector here... Okay, they do search the Muxus, but yeah, even if they have the Prospector here, they don't have enough mana to play the Muxus. So if they're playing my list, I can't think of anything that can save them here. Thankfully. Okay, so they pass. Yeah, sweet. So we just win that one then. Nice. So had we not drawn the Greasefang there, I think apparitioning the Revels would have slowed them down pretty significantly. Like, they do have the Matron. I guess it just depends on the rest of their hand, really. And then we also had Inquisitor Captain that we can use to try and find Greasefang or another apparition. So even if we hadn't drawn the Greasefang there, I think we had a decent shot of winning that game. But yeah, I mean, the opponent's... the deck the opponent is playing is a deck that I made and covered a couple weeks ago. And it is incredibly strong if the opponent doesn't have a way to kill Revels. You just pop off with Goblins, and it's actually pretty easy to set up infinite loops if you know what you're looking for. You know, if you plan your turns out and you get good hits off Revels, you can win out of nowhere really quickly. So the opponent, you know, their deck is pretty scary. I mean, thankfully we have Heartless Act as instant speed interaction, which can be pretty huge. But yeah, we'll see how things go game 3. So this hand, I think I'm pretty happy to keep. Because we have, even though we've got 4 lands, we've got Diviner of Fates that can loot some of those lands away, and we've also got Heartless Act and Apparition. You know, going second, I think having interaction or a very fast Greasefang is very important. Now, if they're playing my list, I think I was running Unlicensed Hearse in the sideboard, and at pretty high numbers as well, to be able to deal with the Phoenix deck. So that is a bit of a concern if you do draw. You know, if you're considering keeping a hand that is kind of reliant on a fast Greasefang to win, but thankfully, you know, this hand isn't reliant on the graveyard at all. Wow, the opponent mulls to 3. That's crazy. Maybe, I mean, there's not even anything in that deck that you would hard mulligan to. So unless they just got incredibly lucky with like repeated no land hands, I don't know what exactly they were mulliganing to there. So I definitely think we'll play an untapped land here, just to give us the option to Heartless Act. You know, if they play like a Pashlik Mons or something. Oh wow, they missed their 3rd land drop. I mean, if you mull to 3, that's going to happen. Oh yeah, I'd be interested to see what they were mulliganing to there. Okay, so we Diviner of Fates. Hitting Rafine is pretty nice here, because that will really allow us to not only filter through our draws, but we'll also start getting card advantage off the Diviner of Fates as well. Wow, we're flooding out so much this match, it's crazy. And the other really nice thing, even if you have to discard a land with Diviner of Fates on the battlefield, you do seek a land off the Diviner of Fates, which is essentially thinning your deck. You know, it's making you less likely to draw lands on future turns. Wow, they brought in Hidetsugu. I mean, that's definitely not a card I'm worried about at all. That's a card that is in that deck pretty much exclusively for the food deck. And if they're running the same 75 card list that I put out, I think Unlicensed Hearse is just much better graveyard hate against my deck. Okay, so we'll definitely discard some lands here. And then we can also play the Hallowed Blade out here. So just closing the game out while the opponent's obviously stumbling on mana is really important here. We're not really fussed about the Hidetsugu because we have Apparition and Heartless Act as answers to it. We're going to be drawing 4 cards off the Rafine next turn probably, so yeah, I'm pretty confident about this game. Obviously the opponent mulligan to 3, so we could use the removal here straight away, but I think we're much better off attacking first. First of all, to see what we draw, and second of all, the opponent might be incentivized to block, so we could start discarding non-lands here in order to increase our clock slightly, but I think since we've flooded out so much this game, we're better off just getting rid of lands here, which will then pull more lands out of our deck, so hopefully future draws won't be so land heavy. Okay, they do block with Pashlik Mon, so that does enable them to kill the Diviner of Fates here, which is fine, because we have the second one in hand already. And yeah, we should be good to win next turn here, because we can play multiple creatures during our main phase 2. The opponent's deck, if they're running the same deck that I published, doesn't have any sweepers or anything like that, so... Okay, so we play the Diviner of Fates here. Okay, nice, so we hit the Parhelion. So get that into the graveyard for in case we draw Greasefang, and then... I think playing Hallowed Blade makes more sense here. I was going to say we could play Ledger Shredder to force a bit more damage through in the air, but the opponent has no board at the moment, so I think just getting more power into play makes sense. Okay, nice. Okay, so we're going first here, and yeah, this hand looks pretty decent. You know, all we need is our third land to go Hallowed Blade into Rafine, and then pitch Parhelion, which is a pretty sick curve out. So we're against a Lurrus deck here, so it is a little bit concerning if we were against Auras, because we don't have any interaction, but we are going first, so if we can, you know, go Hallowed Blade into Rafine, pitch Parhelion, and then potentially find the Greasefang off one of these Inquisitor captains, that could definitely be a way that we outrace them. But yeah, we'll see what the opponent's on. Lurrus doesn't guaranteed mean they're on Auras. There could be a number of other decks. Could be Golgari Food. Could be... oh well, Blood Crypt, okay. So it could also be like old school Arcanist, I guess. So the Inquisition. So they've obviously only got a choice between Hallowed Blade and Rafine here. Hallowed Blade is the greedy take. They could take the Hallowed Blade and just hope that I don't draw my third land. Okay, they go for that. We already drew the third land, sick. So unless they have another discard spell, they kind of get punished for that take. Unless they have a removal spell for their feet. I guess yeah, if they have a removal spell, that also kind of makes a bit more sense. Okay, so they pay out the Arcanist. We'll definitely run out the Rafine here. And then they no longer have a target for the Inquisition. So if they do attack with the Arcanist here, which they might do because there is an unknown card in my hand, then that Inquisition gets completely blanked. And yeah, I guess it does make sense for them to take the Hallowed Blade if they don't have good removal for it. You know, if they have something like I don't even know, like a Heartless Act or something, they could potentially take out the Rafine here, because, or I guess Fatal Push if they have a way to trigger Revolt. Young Pyromancer, okay. So they do attack, they do Inquisition. Thankfully we don't have anything that Inquisition can hit here, but Young Pyromancer is a little bit concerning, but thankfully we have Rafine. We have ways to attack in the air. I'm not going to block here just in case they have, I don't know, like Strangle or something. I think we're fine to let the 1 damage through. Although I guess they wouldn't have been able to pay for the ward. I probably should have blocked there thinking about it, but hopefully it doesn't end up matching. Either way, we can pitch the Parhelion here, and now we can play Inquisitor Captain, and if we hit Greasefang, we have Parhelion in the graveyard already, which is pretty sick. And there are also just a lot of other good hits that we could get as well. Okay, so opponents in the tank here, they've obviously got something. Okay, so Captain resolves, let's see what we hit here. Okay, so I mean Thalia isn't bad, but I think Diviner of Fates is just much better because it, you know, draws us a card and, well, we essentially just get card advantage off it, and we get to dig an extra card deeper. And if it does survive, it works incredibly well with Rafine, because then we start conniving with Rafine every turn, and then, you know, we get to filter through our deck a lot, and we also get card advantage off the Diviner as well, which is pretty huge. Okay, Village Rite. So it looks like the opponent's playing like the really old school build of Arcanist, potentially with like Croxer, Stitcher's Supply, that sort of thing. Because I've not seen Young Pyromancer and a Lurrus Arcanist deck in a while. Okay, another Pyromancer. That is a little bit scary. So they do have Inquisition. Thankfully we have, well, not thankfully, but we've flooded out quite a lot, so we don't have anything that they can hit with the Inquisition, thankfully. So they attack with the Arcanist, so I guess they're going to Village Rite sacking the Arcanist here. Oh wow, they sack a Pyro token. Maybe they have Fatal Push in hand? I mean, we're definitely going to take the opportunity to kill the Arcanist here. But I mean, yeah, I don't get why they didn't just sack the Arcanist there, because then they would have just ended up with an extra token. Okay, so we have to go for the Sentinel here, otherwise one of our Rafine dies to the Legend rule. So it's a bit annoying that we flooded out quite a lot here, but we do get to connive 2 here, which is nice. Wow, okay. That's pretty unlucky. We've drawn so many lands here. So it's pretty important that Rafine survives here. We could have attacked with a Diviner just to connive an extra card, but hopefully since we've drawn so many lands here, we're less likely to. And also Diviner of Fates is pulling lands out of our deck as well, which means that, you know, it's thinning the land count in our deck, so hopefully, you know, we'd have to get pretty unlucky to keep drawing lands here. Wow, Archfiend's Vessel. I guess they must be running Claim to Fame then, for them to be running the Vessel. But yeah, this is like proper old school Arcanist. I remember building decks like this a while ago. Okay, yeah, there's the Croxer. So we're definitely going to be bringing in Graveyard Hate against this sort of deck. Wow, okay, we get to we get to seek off the Diviner. That's pretty funny. So that's another land out of our deck that we don't have to worry about drawing, thankfully. Oh wow, are you kidding? I'm just going to attack with... I mean, to be honest, I might just attack with everything, just to get rid of all these lands in our hand. And I'm going to target the Esper Sentinel here, just to make it bigger, hopefully, so that they can't just block it. But yeah, we'll just get rid of all these lands here, and Hallowblade's not ideal either. I think we'll keep one land. Oh wow, the opponent just concedes, okay. So this matchup we definitely want Graveyard Hate because they're a very specific version of Arcanist that is super reliant on the graveyard. Hallowblade isn't as good here. I think I'm going to bring in a single copy of Apparition just to be able to deal with stuff like Croxer. Actually, maybe we want Heartless Act in this matchup instead of Thalia because they are running Young Pyromancer and Dreadhorde Arcanist, which are very important to kill on turn 2, especially because we're going second. I just want to make sure that we've got enough creatures still for the captain. Looks like we do. So yeah, I kind of like this configuration. Against most Arcanist decks, I typically don't like bringing in Remorseful Cleric, but this particular version, you know, since I've seen Archfiend's Vessel and Croxer, it looks like the old school builds that, you know, their main weakness was Graveyard Hate. The main reason that deck wasn't commonly run for ages was because, you know, Rest in Peace or just any kind of Graveyard Hate really hurts that sort of deck. Okay, Archfiend's Vessel on 1, so we get to play the Sentinel out here. And we got Heartless Act on 2 if they do play an Arcanist or Young Pyromancer, into potentially Diviner of Fates or a Fiend on turn 3, which is pretty nice. Wow, Innocent Blood. Okay, I wasn't expecting to see that. And they give us the card off the Sentinel. Okay, so they wanted to claim. So they do get a 5/5 flyer, which is a pretty sick turn 2, but thankfully we have the Heartless Act here, so we can just kill it straight away. And the next turn, I think we're probably interested in getting... Oh wow, they just concede, okay. I'll take that.